Imagine living in a world where every human being eventually faces the same certainty: death. Kings, farmers, warriors, prophets, history shows us that no one escapes it. Yet in the early pages of the Bible, there is a mysterious exception: a man who simply vanished. No burial, no grave, no recorded death. The ancient text simply tells us that he walked with God, and then he was no more. This man was Enoch, and according to the genealogy in the book of Genesis, he was the 7th generation from Adam. But what makes his story extraordinary is not how he lived, it's how his story ends. Because unlike every other patriarch listed before the Great Flood, Enoch does not die. Instead, the text tells us that God took him, and that raises one of the most intriguing mysteries in biblical history. Why? Why would one human be removed directly into heaven while every other person must experience death? What was so different about Enoch? To begin answering this question, we have to look carefully at the context of the world he lived in. The generations before the flood were described as a time of increasing corruption. Violence filled the earth. Human behavior was deteriorating rapidly. But Genesis introduces another mysterious element during this time: a strange group known as the Nephilim. These figures are briefly mentioned in Genesis as giants or powerful beings that appeared when the sons of God interacted with human women. The passage is short, but its implications are enormous. Because if these beings existed, it suggests that something unusual was happening in the ancient world. Something that blurred the boundary between the human and the divine. Later writings expand on this mystery. One of the most famous of these texts is the Book of Enoch. Although it is not included in most modern Bibles, it was widely known in ancient Jewish communities. In fact, parts of it were discovered among the famous scrolls found near the Dead Sea. And in this book, Enoch is not just a righteous man. He becomes something far more extraordinary: a messenger, a witness, even a traveler between worlds. The text describes Enoch being taken into the heavens, where he is shown cosmic secrets, visions of angels, the movements of the stars, and the coming judgment upon the corrupted earth. But here is where logic begins to ask deeper questions. Was Enoch taken because he was especially righteous? Or was his removal necessary for another reason entirely? Consider the timing. According to the biblical timeline, Enoch lived shortly before the events that would lead to the Great Flood, a period when the earth was becoming increasingly chaotic. If the stories about the Nephilim represent some form of corruption spreading through humanity, then removing Enoch might have served a purpose. Perhaps he was preserved because he had not been affected by that corruption. Perhaps he was chosen as a witness to record what was happening. Another possibility is even more intriguing. What if Enoch's translation into heaven was not simply symbolic language? What if ancient people were describing an event they did not fully understand? When the text says God took him, what exactly does that mean? Was it a spiritual transformation? A divine reward? Or could it represent some kind of encounter so extraordinary that ancient writers could only describe it in supernatural terms? The story becomes even more fascinating when we realize that Enoch's legacy did not disappear with him. In later traditions, Enoch is sometimes associated with immense knowledge: astronomy, mathematics, secrets about the structure of the cosmos. Some interpretations even suggest that he became an angelic figure after his transformation. But whether we interpret these accounts literally or symbolically, one fact remains undeniable. Enoch stands apart from every other human mentioned in those early genealogies. Adam dies, Seth dies, Enoch dies. Each generation repeats the same pattern. They lived, and then they died. But when we reach Enoch, the pattern suddenly breaks. He walked with God, and he was not. Why break the pattern here? Why insert such a mysterious exception? One explanation is that the story serves as a reminder that closeness to the divine transcends ordinary human limitations. Another possibility is that the story preserves an ancient memory on event that later generations struggled to interpret. But there is also a philosophical dimension to this story. If one human could be taken directly into heaven, what does that say about the relationship between humanity and the divine? Does it suggest that death is not the only possible destiny? Or does it point to a rare moment when the boundary between heaven and earth became thin? And if Enoch was removed before the flood, was that simply a reward for his faith? Or was it protection? Protection from a world that was descending into chaos. Protection from a corruption that threatened the very future of humanity. The truth is, the the Bible leaves us with only a few lines about Enoch, but those few lines open the door to enormous questions. Questions about ancient history, questions about divine intervention, and questions about the mysterious forces that may have shaped the earliest chapters of human civilization. Perhaps that is why Enoch's story has fascinated readers for thousands of years, because sometimes the smallest details in ancient texts reveal the biggest mysteries. A man who walked with God, a prophet who vanished, a life that ended not with death, but with disappearance. So what really happened to Enoch? Was he rewarded for his righteousness? Was he removed to protect him from the corruption of the world? Or were ancient writers describing something far more mysterious than we realize? Whatever the answer may be, Enoch's story invites us to ask deeper questions about the nature of the divine and humanity's place within the universe. And maybe that is the real power of these ancient stories. They remind us that history is not only about what we know, it is also about the mysteries we continue to explore. If you enjoy documentaries that examine the logic, mysteries, and hidden questions inside ancient biblical stories, make sure to subscribe to the channel, because every story we explore together pushes us one step closer to understanding the strange and fascinating world behind the Bible.